In early 2014, RockShox revealed the Bluto, a suspension fork designed specifically for fat bikes. At that time, fat bikes were still a pretty rare thing to see out in the wild. Fast forward 8 years and you'll see fat bikes all the time, but there are still shockingly few fat bike suspension options out there. The Manitou Mastodon and the RockShox Bluto are still the major players, with a couple of other brands holding a very small percentage of the market share. I've ridden fat bikes for about 5 years, and every time I've had a suspension fork for them, it's been a Bluto. If you read online, most people will say the Mastodon with its beefier stanchions make it the best option out there though. I've ridden one a few times, and my initial impression is good, but one fork that's always caught my eye is from Wren Sports. With its bridgeless, upside-down design, it definitely stands out from the crowd. There are a few reviews out there, but I wanted to get my hands on one to find out what they're all about. I reached out to Wren and they sent me one with 110 millimeters of travel. In this video, we'll get some background on the Bluto and the Mastodon, and then take an initial look at the features and theoretical benefits of this non-traditional Wren Sports fork. So normally I have this on the RockShox Bluto. This is about the fourth one that I've had between all the fat bikes that I've owned. I've somehow always ended up with the Bluto. It either came on a bike that I bought, or there was a really good deal on a used one. So I've always ended up with this, and I've never really had too many complaints. Most people complain about the Bluto, saying that it's just not up for the task. It's got 32 millimeter stanchions, which by today's standard are pretty narrow. A lot of the cross-country dedicated forks don't even have 32 millimeter stanchions anymore. They've made them bigger to make them beefier, able to handle rougher terrain, and to feel stiffer and more in control as things got rowdy. This is the RCT3 model, so it has low speed compression adjustment up here, as well as the ability to lock out the fork. And it basically has 3 different modes. There's like fully open, there's like a pedaling mode that firms it up a little, and a full lockout mode. This one is 100 millimeter travel. They also sell an 80 millimeter and a 120, and this comes in at around $700. They might have increased the price lately as everything has increased, it seems. It's also really lightweight. It actually weighs in under 4 pounds, and that's with the steerer all the way. So it's pretty lightweight for a fat bike fork, especially compared to the Mastodon and even the Wren. My 2 main complaints with the Bluto are: 1, tire clearance. It can clear a 26 by 4.8 and a 27.5 by 4, and it would probably clear the 27.5 by 4.3s that have started to come out. However, it will not really clear a 4.5, 27.5 by 4.5. And with 29 by 3, it is very, very close. I run Chronicles, which are very low profile on the tread, but I've heard that people who run DHFs or some of the other knobbier tires have issues with it rubbing on the bridge. And I can totally see that, because the Chronicles, the times that I have encountered mud, I've had it rub. That's my main complaint. The other one is it does feel a tiny bit unstable or squirmy as things get really intense or things get really rocky and you're putting the work in on that fork. I have noticed some issues there. I'm a bigger rider, and I chalk most of that up to that. I don't have a Mastodon on hand. It's made by Manitou, and that is the fork that most people seem to say is just the best one out there. It has beefier stanchions at 34 millimeters. It has a really good damper in the Pro version, at least. And it has a lot more features that make it more up to general trail riding, whereas the Bluto is more of a cross-country fork that they widened, and it does great most of the year, but if you're gonna ride really hard, it might not have enough. The Mastodon also has a wider range of travel, so from 80 up to 150 millimeters are available. So if you have a fat bike that requires a lot of travel or was built around a longer travel fork, that's probably your only option. The Mastodon is sold as either the Comp or the Pro. The Pro has a better damper and a few other things that make it more of a higher end fork. But in the Pro and Comp versions, there are also 2 different widths. You can get the standard width or the extended width. I don't understand the purpose of the standard width unless you're racing or something like that, but the extended one is able to clear bigger tires. So in my opinion, that's probably what I would go for anyway. I know that sounds a little hypocritical because I mostly run a 4-inch tire on a 27.5, which the normal Mastodon will clear, but if I'm gonna have a fat bike fork, I want it to be able to clear the widest tires possible in case I want to ride them at some point. So I would definitely go with the EXT version, that extended version. I've ridden a Mastodon a few times, and yeah, it's impressive. I really like it. Unfortunately, my biggest gripe with the Mastodon is, one, I feel like availability has been really weird for some reason. It's just not as common to see them in stock for some reason. My main reason though is the price. The comp version comes in at $725, which, you know, that's only 25 bucks more than this Bluto. But I have heard some complaints about that comp version, and so I'd rather have the Pro, but the Pro comes in at $950. So it's a pretty expensive fork. Most people would say it's well worth the price. I've just never been able to get my hands on one for an extended period of time. So that brings me to the Wren here. The Wren has a little bit of an interesting history. So I'm not sure who originally designed and started manufacturing these, but it was brought over to the United States and sold under different names. And at some point, Wren Sports got the exclusive license to it, and they've made some modifications to improve it. And so they're the ones that sell it now. As you can tell, the reason I've had my eye on it is because of this inverted design. It's pretty cool looking. Super beefy up top. You can't really tell because of these bash guards right here, but the stanchions are on the bottom. And these are 36 millimeters. So Bluto was 32, Mastodon, which was considered super beefy, was 34. And then these step it up another notch to 36. So I'm interested to feel how that rides, but that was one of the reasons I was pretty excited to try it. I also like this bridgeless design. I just think it looks cool, and massive tire clearance. Sure, you do have to worry about, you know, on full compression, is the tire going to contact the frame, but that's with any fork. The main benefit here though is, yeah, you can clear a 26x5, probably a 5.1. This is a 29x3. I'm not going to have any issues with mud with it rubbing. And 27.5 by 4.5 will clear this, whereas it won't the Bluto, and it will only clear on the extended version of the Mastodon. One other difference between this fork and the Mastodon and the Bluto actually is the offset, how far this axle is out from the center of the fork. On this, it's 45 millimeters. On both the Mastodon and the Bluto, it's 51. 51 millimeters is more of a traditional offset, and that is something though that people have started to move away from. As bikes have gotten slacker, that's just put the tire farther and farther out, and that really affects the way the bike handles. So while the bikes have gotten slacker, they've started to bring that offset in a little bit, from 51 down to 43 or 45, or, you know, in the low 40s. That's actually something I noticed on this RSD. While it's not a crazy slack head tube angle, it's 67 degrees, which is, you know, not even slack anymore. For a fat bike, it is pretty progressive. And I have noticed with the Bluto, I was getting a little bit of more of a floppy steering. And so I think this might help that actually, to bring that tire a little bit closer. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it can make a huge difference. There's a few reasons for this inverted design. One of the benefits is that you don't have to worry about dirt falling on top of your seals and just sitting there and scratching your stanchions. So that's one of the benefits there. Since it's on the bottom, it can fall off. It's not going to stick. It's just going to fall off there. Another benefit that they say is that it stiffens up everything up top. Instead of having these smaller tubes up at the top where maybe there's a little more wiggle room, the crown and these upper tubes are 47 millimeters. So you get something ultra stable, ultra stiff, and it ties in with the frame and keeps everything really stable. Things I do worry about are getting scratches down there. I mean, there's been more than one occasion where through a rock garden, I have scraped the bottom of my fork. So I do worry about that a little bit. And just generally the design, I don't know, I want to see how it rides. The stiffness is still something that I wonder about. With no bridge there, am I going to notice that? The way the air spring works on this fork is essentially there's an air chamber and it has a floating piston. To set the sag, you fill in the air at the top, and you set that till you get the right amount of sag. And then to adjust the spring rate, you have another valve at the bottom, and you add some air to that, test it out, ride it, and that adjusts the spring rate, or basically how the spring travels through its compression, the resistance it meets. So I ended up putting around 55 PSI in the top, went and I rode it around like that for a second. I got pretty close to bottoming out that first time. So I added some air to the bottom. It's not really an exact thing because it's still one chamber, and so there is pressure in there. So you basically have to count the number of pumps that you put in. So I put about 8 pumps in there, and that got it to a point that I like the feel of it. Just on that initial test ride, just through my little home trail, I did feel like it was very buttery, very smooth, and absorbed all the trail chatter and did a really good job on some of the little jumps. So I'm really impressed with that. This fork also has a full-on lockout. When you lock this out, this feels more solid than the Bluto, than the Mastodon in my experience. Any fork really that I've ridden, it is solid. Feels perfectly like it's rigid. To some people that won't matter because they never lock it out, but I do lock mine out sometimes, especially if I'm riding in snow. It's nice to not have any bob at all and just to have it completely locked out. This fork weighs in at 4.7 pounds. This is the 110 millimeter travel version. Their 150 version does weigh a little bit more. I think it comes in at 5 pounds. It's a lot heavier than the Bluto, almost a full pound. But the Mastodon, if you get the Pro, it's about 1/10 of a pound less. If you get the Comp, it's 1/2 of a pound less in weight. So a significant difference there. And that's another reason I was pretty interested in this. Just based on the design, I was thinking that looks like it's gonna be between the Bluto and the Mastodon, but it has beefier stanchions. Maybe that'll be a good thing. Install and the setup was really easy. There's no tokens or anything, just a shock pump. Probably the hardest part of the install was routing this brake cable right here. I wish there were some cable guides on here, or some housing guides. They provide these ones that you strap on with zip ties. I don't love it. I don't mind how it looks, but I don't know if it's because this housing was trained to the Bluto, but I was having a lot of issues at first where on compression, this housing right here would extend and hit the spoke. So did not love that. It took me a lot of different tinkering and trying to pull the housing and stuff to get it to not do that. That was probably my biggest complaint with the setup, but otherwise it was just like a normal fork. I'm gonna be riding this fork a lot the next little bit so that I can test it out and give a good review on this. Really grateful for Wren for sending this over to me so I could test out something that I had been really interested in. And it's actually a fork that I feel like is fairly controversial. Not just because of the design. I feel like there have been some people who have had some issues with them, and I want to see if that's really true and put it a little bit through the ringer. So I'm going to be taking it on some smooth single track, some more cross-country type stuff. I'm going to take it down the road to Copper City over in Three Forks, Montana, and try some of the trails there. They have some pretty good rocky sections and some good flow as well with some jumps. So I'm gonna put it through a pretty good series of tests and see how it does, and I'll keep you guys updated. If you wanna see that video, be sure you subscribe so that it pops up in your feed and you don't miss it. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.